Masechet Ketubot Daf Sadi Aleph. We're continuing our discussion of this interesting case where a husband is married to a wife number one and she dies, and then he marries wife number two and then he dies. So he has two payouts that he's responsible for. His estate is. When he died, his estate was responsible to pay the wife as she was alive the ketubah. If she died before the ketubah is collected, then the sons have a right to collect the ketubah, and that is a collection as a loan and has a lien on the property. This has priority. However, there's also the ketuvat benin dichrin, which is in the ketubah. There's a stipulation that even though when she dies first, so the husband inherits her, so therefore he doesn't have to actually pay anything. Nevertheless, once the husband dies, the sons of the wife do get to inherit the amount of the ketubah. It's not a payout as a ketubah. In other words, there's no lien, but rather it's a payout as part of the inheritance, but it takes priority. That gets paid first, and only then all the sons will split evenly whatever is left. So we had a couple of questions. Number one, in this case, surely the second wife and her sons get the ketubah. Does the first wife get benin dichrin or not? We had an inference that said yes. Rav Ashi said no. And then we saw this was actually the subject of a machloket between Tanaim, Ben Nanas, and Rabbi Akiva. And Rav Yosef is about to say that, yes, it is in fact the subject of that machloket. The second question is, what if there's insufficient funds? After you pay the ketuvah and after you pay the benin dichrin, if there's nothing left, well, we know there's a rule that when you pay benin dichrin, if there's zero left, then they don't get the benin dichrin, because the Rabbanan law of benin dichrin cannot override the Deoraita law of all sons splitting the inheritance equally. Therefore, there has to be at least a dinar left over afterwards. So that everybody would agree to. The question here is, since there is actually more than enough money for the benin dichrin, because part of it was already used for the ketubah, does the ketubah payout count as a surplus? And therefore, you'll pay the ketubah, you'll pay the benin dichrin, and even if there's nothing left after, that's okay, because that was considered the surplus. Or do we leave it out? The ketubah is a payment of a loan. Then after that, we see, is there enough after the benin dichrin? If so, they can get it. If not, then they don't get the benin dichrin, and all the sons get to split it. Once again, there we inferred from this mishnah that yes, the ketubah is considered a surplus, although Rav Ashi challenged that, and the Rabbah said actually number two is the disagreement between Ben Nanas and Tanakama. And now we're going to get to Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says that the machloket was actually about inference number one, and he's going to now double down on that by citing a second baraita. So that's what we are up to. So Rav Yosef, Amar Yosef, be'achat bechaya, be'achat be'moto kamipalge, that this baraita above with Rabbi Akiva was discussing whether when there's in this exact case, when one gets a ketubah, does the other sons of the first wife get the benin dichrin or not? That is what they were talking about. And furthermore, Ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva of that baraita parallel the following machloket Tanya. נשא את הראשונה ומתה, נשא את השנייה ומת הוא, באים בניה של זו לאחר מיתה, ונוטלין כתובת אימן. Just a word of intro, we're going to see a few different explanations of this baraita. So just be prepared to remember the wording here, because it's going to come up, we're going to analyze it. So a man marries one woman and she dies. Then he marries a second wife and he dies. Exactly our case. So the sons of the second wife will come after his death and take the ketuvah of their mother. That's the payment of the ketuvah, the actual ketuvah for the second wife. And that's all. Tanakama doesn't say anything else. He stops there. So the implication we're going to say at first is, it sounds like he doesn't pay the benin dichrin. Rabbi Shimon, although that's not explicit here. Rabbi Shimon omer, im yesh motar dinar, elo notlin ketubat iman, ve'elo notlin ketubat iman, ve'im lav holkin b'shaveh. Rabbi Shimon says, if there is extra money, an extra dinar, after the payout, then the sons of the second wife will get their mother's ketubah that they're getting as a ketubah payment, as with liens, and the sons of the first will collect their ketubah, their mother's ketubah, that will be as benin dichrin. But if there is no extra dinar, then the second one will get the payout of the ketubah, but the first will not get a benin dichrin. Rather, they will split everything else that is left over. Okay, so it seems that Rabbi Shimon it seems that Tanakama is not allowing for benin dichrin ever, whereas Rabbi Shimon says, well, as long as there's a dinar, then there can be benin dichrin. Although that's going to be our first assumption. We're going to see all the way at the end, we're going to actually flip it and say, actually, Tanakama does allow for benin dichrin in all cases, because he'll consider we'll see why. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says no, only under certain circumstances, if there is motar dinar, and it has to be a specific type of money and a specific amount. Okay, so let's see. What is the machloket between these? Ma'ila b'hakami palge. The mosavar achat b'chayav achat b'moto yesh lein ketubat benin dichrin. It seems like Rabbi Shimon thinks that in our case, when one wife died in his lifetime and one died after his lifetime, that there is ketubah, there is benin dichrin. Umor savar, that's Rabbi Shimon. Umor savar achat b'chayav achat b'moto en lahem ketubat benin dichrin. Whereas Tanakama, who doesn't mention anything about the sons of the first wife inheriting, it must be that he thinks that there is no benin dichrin. Remember, the reason was because of fighting. We don't want the sons here of the first one to say, listen, we got a ketubah payout because our mother was alive when the dad died. But we're not getting benin dichrin, therefore we don't think you should get benin dichrin either. And it could be that they're, different amounts, and so it will lead to fighting. Whereas if they're all getting benin dichrin, then they're fine. That's fair. But because they're getting paid in a different way, even though it's both because of the ketubah, this is the actual ketubah, this is only benin dichrin, so it will lead to fighting. So therefore, Tanakama here would say no. So that's what Rav Yosef proposes, that both the Baraita above and the following Baraita are all talking about whether you get benin dichrin or not. But we reject this. In fact, everyone agrees in this Baraita that you get benin dichrin. V'hacha bedinar mekarka'e kami palge. Mor savar mekarka'in metartelela umor savar afilu metartele. So that what they're arguing here is that, yes, everyone would agree that they get benin dichrin as long as there is some surplus. But what is the nature of that surplus? According to the Tanakama, the surplus has to be from land. If it's movable, that's not considered a surplus. There has to be enough to pay out the benin dichrin with land, and 1 dinar worth of land left over, that's fine. But movables don't count. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says, even a dinar, that's a movable, even cash, that also works. The surplus can be that. Then we reject this too. Rabbi Shimon omer, afilu yesham nechasim she'en lahem achrayut enan kelum ad sheyesh sham nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayut yater al shetei ketubot dinar. This is a Mishnah that we're going to see on the bottom of this very page. That says, according to Rabbi Shimon, even if there is property that it cannot be used as a guarantee for a loan, in other words, movable property, is not considered a surplus. That's not taken into consideration. If you want to have a surplus, there has to be land which can be used as a guarantee above and beyond both of the ketuvah payments. Only if there is some surplus land, then you can follow the benin dichrin you can give out the Benin Dichrin because there's something left over for the biblical inheritance. And Rabbi Shimon says that. So it's impossible to say that Rabbi Shimon over here in this Baraita thinks that movable is okay. So we're going to come to yet another explanation. Elahacha bedinar misha'bedi kami palge. Mosaba benechodin in mi misha'bedela. Or mosaba afil misha'bede. So maybe we're talking about lien property. According to Tanakama, who says that there is no benin dichrin payment, that is because we only consider, we're talking about a case where there's no free land, but only land that has a lien on it. And the Tanakama says free land that the that the inheritance actually has in its possession, that can be considered, and we check that if there's surplus good. But if it's land there that only has a lien on it, then it's no good. You can't use that. It's not considered the surplus. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says, even if it's land that's there, even if it has a lien on it, that can still be considered surplus, and benin dichrin would be paid out. So does that work? Rabbi Shimon omer, im yesh sham motar dinar, kevan sheyesh sham motar dinar miba'ele. Wait, but that doesn't fit the language with the Braita above. The Braita above says, Rabbi Shimon says, if there is a motar dinar. Instead, he should have said, since there is a motar dinar. In other words, they're arguing about a case where there is some land there, but the land has a lien on it. So the very question is, this land that's there, is it considered a motar dinar or not? So the Shimon shouldn't say if there is a motar dinar. Everyone would agree if there is a motar dinar, then you get the bindin dichrin. And so the Shimon is saying, since I consider that to be a surplus, then that's why they inherit. So the language doesn't fit this explanation. Rather, a new explanation. The Baraita is talking about where there is a little bit of surplus, but the surplus is less than a dinar. Is that sufficient? Mor sabar dinar in, pachot midinar la. Tanakama said, if there is a full dinar or more, that's considered surplus, and then you give benin dichrin. But if it's less than a dinar, even though there is something extra, it's not a significant amount for the biblical law of inheritance, so then no benin dichrin. Mor savar afilu pachot midinar, whereas Rabbi Shimon says, even if it's a small amount, even less than a dinar, that's still a surplus, that's sufficient to apply the biblical law, and you do give benin dichrin. Again, we say that doesn't fit the words of the Braita. Rabbi Shimon dinar kamar. He says Rabbi Shimon says if there is a dinar, so he should have says if there's a little bit. Dinar sounds like he needs the full dinar. Okay, v'chitema epuch. So maybe we'll reverse it and say that actually it's Rabbi Shimon that requires a full dinar, and so he's saying if there's a full dinar, then you pay the benin dichrin. And Tanakama, who didn't mention anything about a full dinar, they didn't say any wording about dinar. They would say that yes, you pay out the second wife, and even if there's just a little bit, you pay the kids of the first wife as well. So this is interesting because Tanakama actually didn't say anything about paying or not paying the first wife. So that's why we can actually reverse their opinions, and that would fit the wording. The problem is, it's not going to fit what's upcoming in the next Mishnah. Tanakama dematnitin named dinar kamar. In the very next Mishnah they're about to learn, the Tanakama there, who we presume is the same as the Tanakama of the Baraita above, because they both have Rabbi Shimon in them, also says dinar. I'll show you here. Right here, this is the next Mishnah, and it says hayash shamotar dinar. So that means that everybody would require a full dinar. Here's the final answer to explain this Baraita. We're going to go back to the first two possible answers that we presented above, except that we're going to reverse the opinions. Number one, that they disagreed about the surplus in movable property. Can it be movable or not? And now, since we're going to reverse it, it's actually Tanakama that says movable is okay. but Rabbi Shimon says no, it has to be land. And also regarding if there is land but it's leaned, Tanna Kama would say if it's leaned, it's okay. That's called a surplus. So therefore, Tanna Kama would award the benin dichrin, even if it's only movable property, even if it's land that's leaned. He says, yeah, you give the benin dichrin all the time. And Rabbi Shimon comes and says there has to be motar dinar, meaning he's being more, you could say, machmir, and having higher requirements, requiring that dinar be in the form of land that has no lien on it, and only then he would allow the benin dichrin to be paid out. And so that is the final answer that fits best with the wording. Next, Amar Mozutra Mishemed Papa Hilcheta Achat Bechaya Achat Moto Yeshan Ketubat Benin Dichrin Uchtuba Naaset Mutar Lechaberta. After all that discussion, what's the bottom line? Mozutra says in the name of Papa, the halacha is yes. In the case where a man has two wives, one dies before he dies and one of the wives dies after he dies, there is going to be Benin Dichrin. They'll pay out the Ketuvah for the second wife, and yes, as long as there's something extra, they will pay the benin dichrin. Now, what do you count the ketubah as extra? Yes, we say yes to that as well. In other words, if we go look back here, these two inferences are both true. Halacha lema'aseh, the benin dichrin is paid out, and even if there's no extra cash after the ketuvah and benin dichrin payment, you still pay out the benin dichrin payment because the ketuvah itself is considered a surplus. That's halacha. We're going to ask a question about this formulation. Bishlama I ashmeinan achat bechaya v'achat b'moto yeshan ketuvat benin dichrin velashmeinan ketubah naaset mota lechaberta havamina iika mota dinarin ila la. Says, I understand why you need to tell me that the first law, that there is ketuvah of benin dichrin, because if you told me that and you didn't tell me that there is motar, that the ketuvah is considered motar, I would think that benin dichrin is paid out only if there is extra money after the payment of the ketubah and the benin dichrin. Otherwise, there's no payment. So I understand why you need to tell me that clause. But here's the thing. Really, you don't have to tell me. If you told me the first and not the second, then I would say the second is not true. But if both are true, then just tell me the second one. Or just tell me that the ketuvah is considered a surplus. And I would know on my own. Why would you tell me that the ketuvah is considered a surplus? It's considered a surplus. Therefore, since there is more money left over, and the ketuvah itself is considered that surplus, therefore you can pay the benin dichrin. So now it's obvious. I would know on my own that there is a payment of benin dichrin. So why do you have to tell me that halacha is like both? You could tell me just the second one, and I can infer that if you're telling me that there's always a surplus because the ketuvah itself is considered a surplus, therefore you can pay benin dichrin, I would know myself that that there is that you do pay benin dichrin. You don't worry about the fighting. That the second sons will say, hey, we got a ketuvah, we didn't get benin dichrin, why should you get benin dichrin? So I would know that was true. So why do you have to tell me both? So the answer is, Iyashminan hachi hava amina. Kigon. שנשא 3 שנים ומתו 2 בחייו ו1 במותו, ואך תמית לאחר מיתה יולדת נקבה היא, ולאו בת ירושה היא. There is a scenario where you can have the second law apply and not the first. Here it is. If a man is married to 3 women, 2 of them die in his lifetime, and they both have sons. And one of them dies after he dies, and she has only a daughter. And so that daughter will get the ketuvah payout because the mother was alive at the time. So when the husband died, he owed the mother. If the payout didn't go to the mother, then then the daughter does have a right to collect that ketuvah. But she is not part of the inheritance because she's a girl, and therefore the inheritance will go only to the sons of the other two wives. So in this case, there's no possibility of leading to infighting, because you're not going to have she is only getting the ketuvah. She doesn't care about what happens to the rest of the inheritance. She's not going to get a part of it no matter what, and therefore she's not going to complain and say they shouldn't get benin dichrin. And so in such a case, I would want to know that the surplus, if there are limited funds, and if you pay out the ketuvah, then there won't be enough to pay the rest. Well, this would make a difference, because the two wives who have sons, let's say one of them got 1,000 in their ketubah, and one of them had 500 in the ketubah. So if there is surplus funds, then one will get 1,000, one will get 500. If there's no surplus, then there will be no benin dichrin, and they'll each get 750. So depending on whether we count the ketuvah to the wife who died last, or not, if we count it as a surplus, then they'll split it 1,500. If we don't count it, and there's no more funds after all these payments, then they'll split it 750. So we have here a case where the second principle applies. We have to know that the ketubah is considered a surplus. But the first principle does not matter here, because there's no possibility of fighting. The girl, the daughter here, who gets the ketubah, is not going to be upset at the others, whether they split it or they get the benin dichrin. Makes no difference to her, because she gets the ketubah and she gets no inheritance no matter what. And therefore, for sure, in this case, there will be benin dichrin. The first law doesn't apply. Aval achat bechaya v'achat bemoto v'had lachar mita yoledet zachar hi ema lechushin tsuye kamash malan. But if I only had the second law, and so I would know whether it applies to this case, I still may think that in the back to the simple case of relatively, of a man who has two wives, one who dies in his lifetime and one after his death, and the one that's after his death, well, both of them have male children, then I might have said that there's no benin dichrin because of quarreling, and that's why the Papa has to tell me that the halacha is like the first law, that there is benin dichrin even in a case like this, and the halacha is also the second inference, that the ketubah is considered a surplus, and that would apply in both of these cases, but both are important to know, because there are cases where only one applies and not the other. Next Mishnah, Mi shayan nasui shete nashim umetu ve'achar kach met hu. So this continuation of the Mishnah above, and now here's the next possibility. A man could be married to two women, and they die first. We didn't have this possibility yet. And then he dies afterwards. So in this case, he needs, at the moment that his wives died, so then he inherits them, so he doesn't have to pay anything out. But after he dies, then he has to pay the sons of both of those wives a benin dichrin. So v'yetomim mevakshin ketuvat iman ve'en sham ela shete ketubot cholkin b'shaveh. So the orphans of the male orphans of the first and of the second are demanding benin dichrin, payment of their mother's ketubah. Here's the thing: there's only sufficient funds to pay these ketubot and nothing extra. So since there's nothing extra, if they pay out the benin dichrin, let's say the one got the ketubah of one was 1,000 and the other one was 500. So, and there's only 1,500 in the estate altogether. If they give one 1,000 and one 500, there's zero left over. Then the biblical law of splitting an inheritance will not apply, and we can't have that. The rabbinic law of benin dichrin overrides the oraita, and therefore we will not apply benin dichrin at all. Instead, both sets of orphans will get 750 each. Now, if there is 1,501, Elu notin ketubat iman, ve'elu notin ketubat iman. Then one will get 1,000. The sons of the other mother will get 500, and then they'll split the one left over. Im amru yetomim, anachnu ma'alim al nichsei abinu yafe dinar. Now, here's an interesting claim that, let's say the ones who are about to get 1,000, let's say there's only 1,500 altogether, which means that now the people that are going to get 1,000 are only going to get 750. So here's what they do. They inflate the value of something that they're getting out of from their father's property. For example, the father had a little piece of land that was worth 100, and they're going to say, you know what, we consider this to be 101. And that way, they receive that instead of 101, and now there's one extra dinar because they received 999. They considered one parcel to be one more than it's worth, and so now there's one dinar left over. Since there's one dinar left over, we get the binin dichrin, we get 1,000, you get 500. So they do this this false inflation, kedesh yitelu ketubat iman. I mean, you might think it's their right to do so because they're saying we're okay with taking less than is the real evaluation. And shamin lahen, we say sorry, you can't do that because it's very nice that you want to assess something you're taking for more than it's worth, and therefore you're actually getting less. Sounds like it's nice of you, but the other kids are being harmed from that. Ela shamin et nechasim bebetin. Rather, the betin comes. They do their own independent appraisal, and if they say this is worth just 100, then it's only worth 100, and they can't claim it's worth 101. If there's potential property there. The property is not actually in the inheritance of the father. So let's say there's 1,500 exactly, but there's accounts receivable. There's something that will fall to them. For example, the grandfather is still alive and he has his own inheritance, but they're expecting that when he dies, then the grandchildren will inherit not only their father's estate but also their grandfather's estate. So it's kind of some incoming money that's incoming. Can you count that as a surplus? The answer is no, right? The ones that are da'ui, that are potential part of the estate, are not what's actually there, and so they would have to split evenly in such a case. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Afilu yesham nechasim she'en lahem achrayut enam kelum. Rabbi Shimon says even if there's cash, there might be $1 million in cash there, that is not considered surplus. Ad sheyusham nechasim sheyesham achrayut yoter al shetei ketubot dinar. There has to be actually land, something that can be used as a guarantee, above and beyond the payment of the two ketuvot benin dichrin, in order for anyone to get the benin dichrin. That's the Mishnah. Tenor Banan, Lazo Elef, Lazo Hamesh Meot. This is the example that I use, is actually from this Baraita. One wife has a ketubah worth 1,000. One wife has a ketubah worth 500. Im yeshamotam dinar, if in the estate there's 1,501 or more, Elu notin ketubat iman, ve'elu notin ketubat iman, then the sons will get benin dichrin, the amount of their mother's ketubah. Vim lav yachliku b'shaveh. If not, then each get only 750, or if there's only 1,000 in the whole estate, each get 500. Pishita merubin v'nitma'atu kevar zachu bahen yorshim. Now, the estate could go up in value or down in value from the time of the father's death, and afterwards, the kids technically inherit the estate, their father's estate, at the time of the father's death. But it still may take some time for them to get around to actually splitting it. So what if there was 2,000 when the father died, but they had some, the land that they had in there depreciated in the meantime, and so by the time they come to actually split it, it's only worth 1,000. So the halacha is that we go by the original amount, because at the time of the father's death, the kids merited their amount, and the ones who were supposed to get the 1,000 have a right to that 1,000. And so therefore, let's say it was worth 2,000, now it's down to now it's down to 1,500. They'll still split it 1,500. So you go by the initial evaluation. Now, mu'atin mitrabumai. But what about the other way around? What if at the time of the father's death there was only 1,500, but then it was, or less, but then all of a sudden the land value went up? So then can we consider that increase? Now when they come to split it, well, one can say, look, there's more here now, right? The one that we're going to get 1,000 says, look, there's plenty. We can fulfill the biblical law. So can we go by the time of splitting, or we still have to go by the time of assessment? So here's an interesting story where it's actually happened. Tashema. There was actually this property from this Bar Sarsur. At the time of the death, it was less than the amount of both Ketubot payments, so they should split evenly. But then it got more after. They came to Rav Amram to settle the question. Rav Amram told the kids who were going to get 1,000, zilu payasinhu. Says, listen, it sounds like he's leaning towards following the initial assessment, and according to the initial assessment, you're only going to get 750. So I suggest that you go appease, make a deal, make a compromise, give them more than their 500, and that way, you could maybe still have a little more. Make a compromise, because if you don't do that, then I'm going to end up saying that's going to be 750, 750. You're going to split it evenly, and you're not going to get any more. So, it'll be. Now it's worth more. So maybe they'll both get the same amount, whatever it is. But you're not going to get any more. So I suggest you go compromise. La ashkachu. But the ones who were going to get 1,000 didn't listen to him, and they said, no, there's more here now. So we want a bigger share of the pie. And we're not listening to you. So Rav Amram says, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to stick you with a thorn that doesn't draw blood. What's a thorn that doesn't draw blood? He means excommunication, because it hurts someone, even though there's no physical harm to their bodies, but it does still cause them significant social harm. And so Rav Amram, they still wouldn't listen. So Rav Amram said, listen, Shadrinu lebe lekamed Rav Nachman. I send this case to Rav Nachman, who was a greater authority, and Rav Nachman would have the weight to enforce whatever his opinion was. And Rav Nachman says, Amalehem, Keshem shemerubin v'nitma'atu zachu behen hayorshin. So Rav Nachman's opinion was that just as when there's a lot of money and then it becomes less, we follow the initial amount, and the ones who were going to get 1,000 still get more than the ones who were going to get 500. We go by the initial amount. So too, when there's less and it becomes more, we follow, it's the same formula, Zachu behen Yerushim. So if in the first case, it means that we split it unevenly, right? The ones that have 1,000 get more because at the initial point it was more. So too in this case, we don't follow the initial, but we follow the greater amount. We follow the greater amount, whatever it is, and the ones who deserved 1,000 will get more than the others. In other words, Rav Nachman overturns the opinion of Rav Amram, and therefore the sons who were going to get 1,000 were actually end up being correct. And it was a good thing that they did not listen to Rav Amram, but they went to the Court of Appeals, and Rav Nachman decided in their benefit. Okay, that's how most Rishonim explain this, although there are some that read it the other way around, that Rav Nachman upheld what Rav Amram said, and he said, just like this, just so to that, meaning we follow the initial amount in both cases. And so when they went to Rav Nachman, they actually lost out on any benefit they should have actually compromised. All right, now we're going to see a whole bunch of interesting cases. There's a siman, a mnemonic to remember them. Elef u'me'a mitzvah b'chtuva Yaakov zakaf sedotav v'dvarim asikin. Okay, try remembering the mnemonic, and then maybe you'll be able to actually remember all of the following stories. So here's the first one regarding Elif. Hahu gabra dahu masike be alfa zuzeh. A certain guy had a creditor with a claim of 1,000 dinar against him. In other words, he owed $1,000 to someone. Havule tere apedane. This guy, the borrower, also had two mansions. Sabinu chada bechamesh me'ah, chada bechamesh me'ah. And he had before, after he received the loan, and before it was collected, he sold these two mansions, one of them for 500 and the other one also for 500. It's easier to explain this case if he sold them both to the same person. So he sold both of these to the buyer. We'll call him the buyer. Now the lender comes to collect his loan. And so he goes to the borrower. The borrower says, I have no money. He says, yeah, what about that land? Oh, that land, I sold the land. Okay, but the lender has a lien on the land. So the lender goes to the buyer and he repossesses one of the mansions. So that's worth 500. Okay, hadad katarif leidach, and now he came back. The lender came again to collect the other house for the rest of the loan. Right, the lender is owed $1,000, so he wants to repossess both of these mansions. However, the buyer doesn't want to give up the mansions. He really likes them, and they're even worth more to him. So shekal alfe alfa zuzeh v'ka'azir legabe. So here's what the buyer does. He takes 1,000 zuz and he goes to the lender. Amar le ishav yalach alfe zuzeh lehayeh. He says, listen, if you want to keep that house and it's worth to you 1,000, then keep it as repayment for the full 1,000, and then you can keep it. That's fine. So he's actually inflating the amount of the mansion. Really, the buyer bought it for just 500. He's saying, listen, if it's worth 1,000 to you, fine, keep it for the full payment. And if it's not worth it to you, and presumably it's not because it was only bought for 500 just before, shekel alfa zuzeh v'istalek. And here's what you should do: take the 1,000 cash from me, the buyer says to the lender, and leave the other house too. I want both houses. In other words, the buyer, he really wants to he bought both houses for a reason. He wants to live there. And so he says, I'll give you $1,000 and that will be the full payment of your loan. So you're happy, and give me back the house because I want the house. So the buyer is willing to do that. Notice that the buyer actually paid twice for them. The buyer paid the original seller, right, the borrower. He paid him $1,000, and he's paying another 1,000. So for him, it's worth it. Now the buyer will have a right to go back to the borrower. The buyer will have a right to go back to the borrower and say, listen, the homes were repossessed. If they were repossessed, he would have a right to go back and take them. Or if he paid money, he would have a right to go back and say, hey, I paid your loan, you owe me money. But at this point, he would rather keep the houses. So here is a case where he is artificially inflating the amount of one of the mansions and saying, is it worth 1,000 to you? That's fine, right? Then you keep that for 1,000 and I keep my house, and that's it. You go home. Or if it's not worth 1,000, see, now that you inflate it, now you have more bargaining power. If it's not worth 1,000 to you, that home, then take this money and then you have to leave your home and give it back to me. Is he allowed to do that? Savad Ameh bar Chama lememad. Hainu matnitin. Rabbi Bar Chama says this is the same as our Mishnah, where it was not allowed. Remember in our Mishnah, when the orphans whose mother's Ketubot was 1,000, and there's only 1,500 altogether in the estate, and the other ones are 500, and that would mean there's not sufficient, there's no surplus, so they're going to have to split it. If the orphans of the 1,000 want to come and say, we inflate the value of this item that we're taking in, and instead of it being 100, we're going to consider it 101, and therefore there's a dinar left. We say, well, you can't do that. You can't inflate the amount of a property so that you can take more, and that seems to be the same as what this buyer is doing, inflating so they can get back the the home. So Ram Bar Chama wanted to say, sorry, you can't do that. However, Amar le Rava, mi dameh hatam itlehu peseda liyatmeh hachamit le peseda. Rava says, no, they're not the same at all. In the case of the Mishnah, there's going to be a loss to the orphans who have only 500. Now they should really have gotten 750 and split equally. By doing this, they're only getting by doing this. Right, they should have gotten 750, and by increasing inflating the amount of this item, now they're only going to get 500. So you can't do this trick at the expense of someone losing money. But in the case of this buyer and lender, is anybody losing money? Nobody's losing. The alfa yahev, alfa shakel. The lender lent out 1,000, and now he has his cash back, and he gets 1,000 back. So he's perfectly happy. And so since no one's losing out anything, it should be perfectly within the buyer's right to say, here, take the 1,000. You're paid in full, and I'm the buyer. I want the homes that I bought. Okay, good. So that's Rava's answer. Now, last question on this. V'tirfa bechama katvinan. Now, regarding the tirfa, the Bet Din will write an authorization to repossess the lien property. Should this buyer, who's kind of acting as a guarantor because there's a lien on this property, he may very well know, he should know there's a lien on it when he buys it. So if this property that he bought is taken, or he has to pay, and pay the lender, so he has a right to go back to the buyer and say, hey, I paid your loan, I want to be paid back from you. The question is, how much does he deserve to get paid back? Because in the meantime, let's assume that the lender kept the house. He said, you know what? I'll take one house. It's worth 1,000 to me. I really like this house, and we're good. I'm accepting it 1,000. So really, there was an increase. This home was bought by the buyer for 500, and now it was accepted by the lender for 1,000. So this doubled in value. So who gets the benefit of that increase in value? Ravina Amad Be'alfa. Ravina said that the borrower has to pay back the buyer 1,000, because at the end of the day, the home became worth 1,000. It was worth 1,000 to the lender. He accepted it as payment for 1,000, and so therefore the borrower has to repay the full 1,000 to the buyer. However, Rav Avira Amar bechamesh me'ah. Rav Avira says no, he should only have to pay the initial amount that he bought it for. The buyer bought it for 500, and now that one home was repossessed. So the borrower should say, listen, you only bought it for 500. I'll repay you your loss, the loss of your original investment, which was 500. And so it's not my problem that it became worth more after. So it's actually the borrower that benefits from the increase in value in the meantime. So this machloket hilchata bechamesh me'ah, and that is the bottom line, that the borrower can say, hey, they repossessed this property. Well, you only paid me 500 for it, so I only have to pay you 500 back. Okay, so the borrower here has a good deal, because the borrower owed $1,000 and now he only has to pay 500 and he's clear. So the borrower benefits from the increase in value. All right, so that's all one story. We're going to have another story that's almost exactly the same as the first, with all the same discussion, just slightly different amounts and slightly different case. The borrower owed $100. He had two small pieces of land. He sold these two pieces of land for 50 each. And so now he owes 100, but he has land that he sold that's also worth 100. The lender wants to collect his loan. The borrower has no money, so the lender goes to the buyer because there's a lien on that property, he takes one piece of land, and then he comes back to take the other piece of land, so then he'll have 100. Shekal me'azuzeh. But the buyer, he doesn't want to give up both pieces of land. And so he takes 100 zuz of cash. Kazil gabe goes to the lender. If you want to keep that land and consider it worth 100 and be paid in full, that's fine. Then I'll let you keep it. But if not, if it's not worth it to you and you want to be paid in full, then you have to accept this cash and leave the land, give it back to me. I don't want it to be repossessed. So does he have a right to do that? Sabad Rav Yosef lememad hainu matnitin. Rav Yosef, instead of Rami Bar Chama we had before, in this case it's Rav Yosef that says, it seems to be the same as our Mishnah, Imamru Yetomim, and in our Mishnah we did not allow the orphans of the one that wanted to collect 1,000 to inflate an item that they were taking in order to get more, so that the other orphans got less. And so, no, we said you can't inflate it. You have to go by the Bet Din's assessment. So therefore, no, they cannot do that. Abaye said here, before it was Rava, now it's Abaye. So it's not the same. In that case, by one set of orphans inflating, they're causing a loss to the other set of orphans. But here, no one's losing out. The lender, he lent out 100 and he's collecting 100, so he's happy either way. Okay, so therefore it can be done. This is a legal mechanism. The buyer can do this. Now, when we come to write a document for the buyer so he can repossess whatever he lost from the borrower, how much would that be? Assuming that the lender accepts the one field for 100, so the buyer can come and say, "Hey, I had a piece of land repossessed, and at the time of repossession, it was worth 100. It was worth that much to the buyer, to the lender, and therefore, borrower, I want you to give me back I want you to pay me 100, right? I paid your loan, which was 100, so give me 100. Rav Avina says, no, the borrower can come and say, listen, I sold you, what was repossessed? One piece of land? That one piece of land I sold you for 50. So I'll pay you back the 50. That's all that was repossessed. We go by the original amount. And that is the halacha, only 50. Okay, next case. Someone owed $100, 100 zuz, shecheb, and he died. In his estate, he left a little piece of land worth 50 zuz to his inheritors. So now the lender, he wants to get paid 100. So he comes to the orphans and he says, "What do you have there? Land? I have a lien on that land." He repossesses the land. Now the orphans, they have some cash, so they take 50 zuz and they buy the land. It's their ancestral land, they want it, so they buy the land. It's worth 50 zuz, they pay 50 zuz. Now hadar katarif la. Now the lender comes to repossess the land again, because after all the lender was owed 100, so he repossesses it once. He sells it for 50, but now he still only has 50, still owed another 50, so he repossesses it again. And now they're fighting about this, right? One said, I bought it back. Another says, well, you still owe me another 50, so I can repossess it. So Abaye decides in favor of the lender. And they said, listen, there is a mitzvah for the orphans to pay the debt of their father. And so when they came with the $50, that's very good. They do have a mitzvah. I'm glad they did that, right? They did the right thing. And so now the first payment, they did a mitzvah. And now the second time that the lender comes to repossess, he has a right to repossess that land, so he can get all 100 back. So it's true, if they didn't buy back the land, and then there would be nothing left, so the lender would not be able to go after the orphan's cash, because no lien on cash, so he wouldn't get it. But now that the orphans did a good thing, because they should pay back what the father did, the lender still has a lien on the land, and he can collect it a second time. However, this law of Abaye is only true when the orphans just give the money without saying what it's for. It's only true when the orphans do not tell the buyer, the lender, that this money is for that piece of land. But if the orphans come and say, listen, we're giving you this 50 zuz as payment for buying that piece of land, then salku, then they remove him. In other words, in this case, since he repossessed the first time, fine. Once he repossessed, there's no more lien on it. If he goes and sells it to someone else, right, he repossessed it. So they're coming as buyers, as if they were third-party buyers. As long as they say explicitly, we are buying your land, then there's no more lien on it, and he cannot repossess it a second time. But if they don't say anything, they just give him $50, and then they take the land, so the lender can say, oh, the $50 you gave me, that was for a half payment of the loan, but you still owe me another $50, and this land, I still have a lien on it, and he can repossess second time. So there is a way for the orphans to get the land back without having to and protect themselves from it getting paid, repossessed again. Last story. There was a son who sold the right to his mother's ketuvah while his mother was alive, which is kind of a chutzpah thing to do. He's saying to this buyer, of course, a mother, she herself, she can sell the right to her ketuvah. It's a somewhat risky, so it'll be for less than the face value of the ketuvah. But should she get divorced, or should the husband die while she's alive, then she will receive that payment. She says, I'd rather get some money now, and if the ketubah gets paid out, then you'll get it. So that is worth a certain amount. So the mother has a right to do that. The son is coming and saying, hey, look, it's somewhat likely that when my mother dies, I will inherit the ketubah. So I'm gonna sell to you the right of my mother's ketubah, even though it's not really his now, so he doesn't have a right to sell it. So, but he adds further. The son says, if my mother comes and she objects to the sale, which the mother has a right to do, because the mother can say, I don't want you to sell my ketubah. The son says, I am not going to help you. I'm not going to reimburse you. Right? If the ketubah is worth 1,000 and this guy is coming and paying 500 for the right to collect the loan, if the mother comes and says, I object to the sale, and then you're not going to, and therefore you don't get it. In other words, let's say she gets divorced and she gets the 1,000, and this guy comes and says, oh, I bought the right to your ketubah. She says, what are you talking about? I'm not giving you anything. I didn't agree to that. I'm keeping the money. And so if she objects, the son says, I'm not going to repay you the 500. I'm getting the 500 and I have no liability. That's the case. So they did that. Let's see what happens. The mother died. She never got divorced. She died. And she never objected during her life. Maybe she didn't even know about it. And now the son is going to get the ketuvah payment. So he has $1,000 coming to him from the father, and now the guy who bought the right to it says, "Hey, I paid you 500 for the right to collect. Now give me the 1,000." But the son, he comes and he makes a complaint and he objects and says, "Sorry, I never had the right to sell it to you. Therefore, I'm not giving you $1. I'm not giving you anything. I sold you something that I didn't buy, that I didn't have. I sold you the Brooklyn Bridge. So now you're going to come to collect it." It wasn't mine to sell you. I'm not paying you anything, and I'm not paying you the original amount of what you paid me either, because I told you that I am free from liability. So this case comes to Rami Bar Chama. It seems to him that the son stands in the place of his mother, and therefore he has a right to object to the sale, just like the mother would have had a right to object to the sale. So he can be a proxy for his mother. He inherited her, and so he can say, "Oh, this sale was never valid because I never owed it. I never owned it to sell it to you. And my mother could have objected that. I'm objecting on behalf of my mother, and therefore that buyer would not get a payout, nor would he get his original investment back. He would be out. Amar le Rava, nehi de achrayut tida, la kabil aleh achrayut tideh, mi la kabil. So Rava says, no, that's not the right law. It's true that he did not make himself responsible for his mother's objection. So he says, if my mother objects, then sorry, you're not going to get the ketubah payment, and I'm not giving you money back. He did exempt himself from liability if his mother objects, but he didn't say anything about if he himself objects, and now the mother's dead, he is objecting on his own account, and so he did not guarantee against that. So if he objects, then he will have to pay the money back to that buyer, and so that was the bottom line. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'Amen.